Okay, so real quick, imagine your parents telling you, just save up, be patient, and buy a house. Back then, that actually made sense. A house cost roughly 3 times what a typical household earned in a year. 3 times. Manageable. Realistic. A real goal. But right now, we're living in a completely different world. The cities people actually want to live in, the ones with jobs, opportunity, and a future, now have homes costing 5, 10, even 14 times the average annual salary. And here's the part that should genuinely shock you. A major global housing report looked at 95 cities across 8 countries. Not a single one was considered affordable anymore. Not one. The problem was so bad, researchers had to invent a brand new category just to describe it. They called it Impossibly Unaffordable. And it is not just a few outlier cities. It is happening almost everywhere. So today, we're walking through this like a story. How did housing go from something regular people could actually buy to what feels like a rigged game built to keep you renting forever? Welcome to Investor Economics, where we break down complex money topics in a way that actually makes sense for your life. If you're new here and you want to understand how the economy is affecting your wallet, your future, and your ability to build real wealth, hit that subscribe button right now. You will want to stick around. All right, let's get into it. First, let's understand the measuring stick economists use. It's called the median multiple. Simply put, it measures how many years of your full household income it would take to buy a median-priced home. Historically, anything under 3 was normal. Under 5 was still manageable. But today, those categories barely describe how extreme things have become. We're talking Hong Kong at 14 to 1, Sydney at 13, Vancouver at 12, London, Auckland, Los Angeles, all deeply unaffordable. But honestly, those are not even the worst cases. In Beijing and Shanghai, price-to-income ratios have reached 20, 25, even 30 to 1 in some areas. That means a regular worker would need to save every single dollar they earn. No rent, no food, no life, for 25 to 30 years just to buy a home. That is not a stretch goal. That is mathematically impossible for most people. So how did we actually end up here? It is not one single cause. It is a mix of problems that built up over decades while no one really stopped them in time. The biggest shift is this. Housing stopped being just a place to live. Somewhere along the way, it became an investment asset, a wealth-building vehicle. And once that mindset took hold, demand exploded from a completely different direction. It was no longer just families looking for a home. Now it was wealthy individuals, private equity firms, and massive investment funds pouring billions into real estate. Companies like Blackstone did not just buy a few properties. They built huge rental portfolios across entire U.S. cities. When a billion-dollar fund competes against a first-time buyer for the same house, you already know how that fight ends. The regular person loses every time. Now let's talk supply, because the obvious solution seems simple. Build more homes, and you would be right. The problem is, it is much harder than it sounds. Zoning laws were originally created for good reasons. Nobody wants a chemical plant next to an elementary school. But over time, these regulations evolved into something very different. They became a barrier around desirable neighborhoods that made it extremely difficult to build new affordable housing near where jobs actually exist. Single-family zoning, height limits, lengthy approval processes. Each rule sounds reasonable by itself. But together, they restrict housing supply in the exact places people need it most. Less supply with the same demand pushes prices higher. That is basic economics. But supply alone does not explain everything. We also have to talk about cheap money. For years, central banks kept interest rates historically low. Borrowing money was incredibly cheap. And all that capital had to go somewhere. A huge portion flowed directly into real estate. Property values surged, investors made strong returns, and that success attracted even more money into the market. It created a powerful cycle that pushed prices higher and higher. Meanwhile, wages for average workers barely moved. Asset prices climbed rapidly while paychecks increased slowly. That gap between what homes cost and what people earn has been widening ever since. Then governments tried to help, and sometimes that help made things worse. Programs like first-time homebuyer grants and government-backed loans were well-intentioned. But when you add buying power to a market with limited supply, prices often rise even faster. The people these programs were meant to help ended up competing for homes that became more expensive because of the programs themselves. So put it all together. Supply restricted by regulations, demand boosted by cheap money and large investors, wages growing slowly, and government programs unintentionally pushing prices higher. That is the full picture of how we got here. But let's make this personal, because behind every statistic is a real person making real-life decisions. When young people do the math and realize homeownership is out of reach, other life choices begin to change too. They delay having children because they do not have stable housing. They turn down better jobs in expensive cities because rent already consumes most of their income. Long-term planning starts to feel pointless. Economists even have a term for one ripple effect: counter-urbanization. People stop moving to big cities for opportunity and instead move to smaller towns just to afford housing. But as more people do this, those smaller towns start getting expensive too. The wealth gap this creates is enormous. If your parents owned a home, their net worth may have doubled or tripled over the last 20 years simply by holding that property. But if you are starting from scratch without family property or inheritance, you are watching that gap grow every year while rent rises and savings struggle to keep up. The Demographia Housing Report described this trend as an existential threat to middle-income households. Those are strong words. This is not just about housing. It affects the stability of the middle class itself. Here is one final number to understand the scale. The total global value of real estate is roughly 3.5 times the entire world's annual GDP. The buildings we live in are worth more than everything the planet produces in 3.5 years combined. That shows how much money has flowed into housing as an investment, rather than simply a basic need. So is there actually a way out of this? Can the system be fixed? Yes, but it requires bold and politically difficult changes. The encouraging news is that some places have already shown progress. On the supply side, New Zealand reformed its national zoning rules to allow denser housing near city centers. Early results showed rents beginning to stabilize. It proved that increasing housing supply can reduce pressure on prices. Minneapolis made a similar move by eliminating single-family zoning citywide. Developers could suddenly build duplexes and small apartment buildings in neighborhoods that previously allowed only one house per lot. More housing types meant more options for buyers and renters. Singapore offers another powerful example. About 80% of Singaporeans live in government-built housing. These are not neglected buildings. They are well-maintained apartments in good locations because the government controls enough supply to keep prices stable. On the demand side, Hong Kong and Wales introduced higher taxes on empty homes and second properties. If you leave housing vacant as a speculative investment, you pay a financial penalty. That encourages owners to either sell or rent the property. Taiwan went even further by adding steep taxes on homes sold within 2 years of purchase. Trying to flip houses quickly becomes far less profitable, which cooled speculation almost immediately. The Netherlands took one of the most aggressive steps by banning institutional investors from buying certain residential properties in major cities. Some lawmakers in the United States have proposed similar ideas, although those proposals are still moving slowly through the political process. No single policy can solve the entire problem, but all of these examples share one important idea. Housing is a basic human need, not just another commodity to trade. A society that cannot provide affordable housing for its working population will face economic and social consequences everywhere else. The honest truth is that housing is broken in many major cities around the world. It did not happen overnight, and it will not be fixed overnight either. But we do know many of the tools that can help: increasing housing supply, managing speculative demand, and rethinking who benefits from rising property prices. The biggest obstacle now is not knowledge. It is political will. Many of the people who vote on these policies already own homes and benefit from high prices. but awareness still matters. The more people understand how the system works, the more pressure builds for meaningful change. That is exactly why conversations like this exist. If this video gave you value, the best thing you can do right now is subscribe to Investor Economics. We break down the issues that actually affect your money and your future in a clear and practical way. And before you leave, make sure to check the description below. I have linked to resources and recommended products connected to what we discussed today. Books, tools, and learning resources that can help you improve your financial knowledge. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.